Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. I'm delighted to be joined by David Angove, who's the Information Governance Lead at Optimum. So today we're going to be talking about information security and quality standards within Optimum and their experience of the implementation and the management of it, but not just within Optimum, but within other companies within the group. That's totally. So anyway, the person that's going to explain this in much better detail than I will is David. So welcome, David.
Hello.
Thanks very much for joining us today. Before we delve into the topics of the ISO standards, could you tell me a little bit about you that not many people know, something that might be quite interesting about you?
Well, before I became a physiotherapist and doing all the ISO stuff, I was a private investigator.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was sort of in the corporate intellectual property world. So it was basically about getting other people to violate their own information governance standards. So it's kind of given me a good perspective now I'm on the other side.
Interesting. Yeah. So you can see in terms of information security, you can see it from both angles then, based on your experience.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And I probably can't ask you any further questions about that role because it'll be highly confidential. So moving on then, could you expand a bit on what the organisation does, Optimum?
Sure. So Optimum Healthcare Solutions is a physiotherapy company primarily, and we've been going since 2004. A couple of years ago, we became part of the Totally PLC group, which is a sort of a broader out-of-hospital care provider. And they work in sort of various sectors like physiotherapy, podiatry, nursing, clinical coaching. And we've got one of our largest subsidiaries is called Vocare, and they do sort of telephone triage for things like the 111 calls on NHS contracts. So it's quite a big company, and works in all sorts of different parts of the healthcare sector.
Okay. Could you just, so looking at Optimum then, so could you just explain about the service that you offer then and how that's delivered?
Sure. We've got about 20 clinics in the southeast of England generally, and that involves providing one-on-one physiotherapy outpatient appointments to all sorts of clients generally in the private sector through things like sort of occupational contracts, arrangements with local gyms, some medico-legal business as well. So it's a bit of a mixture, and that's seeing all sorts of things like back pain, neck pain, knee pain. It could be sports injuries, work injuries, chronic injuries, all kinds of things, really.
Okay, thank you. So why did Optimum choose to adopt ISO 9001, the quality standard, and ISO 27001, the information security standard?
Well, I think with 9001, that was something we had a little while before I was getting involved with it, but it was basically a way of formalising some of our policies and procedures and a way of sort of codifying that to demonstrate credibility to our corporate clients and indeed all of our patients. With 27001, it was kind of a logical extension of doing 9001. But also with GDPR, that was coming up, and lots of businesses in the healthcare sector were, I think, sort of panicking a little bit about what that might involve. And we wanted to just be a step ahead and make sure that we had all our policies, procedures, systems all sort of in good order before the new legislation arrived. So that was really our main driving force, I would say.
With ISO 27001, I guess this is your main area of responsibility, is it, as information governance lead within Optimum?
That's right, yeah. When I'm not being a physio, then yeah, I'm working on information governance.
That must keep you really busy then.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be a bit strange juggling between sort of working on someone's back pain and then writing IG policies.
Yeah. So could you just talk through some of the responsibilities of, having that management system in place? What are your main responsibilities in relation to information security?
Yeah, well, it kind of all starts from, for us really, we're starting with a sort of a risk assessment and making sure that that's kept up to date. Trying to consider all possible risks to the data. Obviously, we're handling a large volume of patient data in the healthcare sector. I could be seeing up to 14 patients a day. We've got 20 or so clinics. So you add that all up, and that's a lot of patient data. So we need to make sure that we're looking at all the risks, to what could happen to the integrity of that data, or even things like, what if our software systems go down and we don't have access to the data. So it starts with that, and then off the back of that, deciding what policies and procedures we need to put in place to make sure that those things don't happen, and in the worst case scenario, if they do, how we're going to deal with it, rather than just sort of panicking, which is what you would see in a lot of, especially smaller businesses who don't have any systems in place.
So you mentioned about policies and procedures. I'd just like to delve into that a bit deeper. So could you give me an explanation on some of the procedures that you've got in place and how they help to reduce risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's things like, it's often quite basic things really, but making sure that in every clinic room, the physio is aware of risks such as, can somebody see in through an adjacent window and look at your monitor? Because somebody could just be walking by, see what you're writing, confidential notes about a patient, and then snap a photo of it on their phone, and that's a data breach. Things like being able to lock the screen when you leave the room. Sometimes you might leave the room for a patient to get changed in there, and you don't want to leave the computer unlocked, and they could go on there and look up anyone's notes, and I've seen that done quite a few times. So it's things like that, really.
So a lot of things are kind of common sense, really, aren't they? But it's a case of making sure that those procedures are documented and then followed. So when you have somebody new coming into the organisation, they know exactly what to do in relation to protecting patient data and company data. It's interesting how you mentioned about the physical security aspects initially. And a lot of businesses think that ISO 27001 is just about data security. So I know that another area is on personnel security. So what kind of controls have you put in place to protect your assets in relation to people, in addition to the physical security? So possibly a starters or leavers process?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we have a starters and leavers process, and we manage all of our HR through sort of an online portal, so we can track who's had what kind of training and make sure that new starters have read policies and procedures and that they understand them, and that's kind of part of their induction process. And then when people do move on, it's making sure that any access rights that they had, physical and digital, are revoked. And that anywhere they've worked, sort of our clinics are quite remote in different sites, so that people working in those sites, it could be a gym or GP surgery where we're renting a room, that they know that person has left and doesn't have the right then to come in and grab the key and come into the clinic room anymore. So it's physical security, digital security, and certainly a human aspect to it as well.
So it sounds as though you've worked in different environments within the healthcare sector. What's your view on why standards are so important within the healthcare sector, David?
I think it's because there are so many patients, as I say, that we could see in the course of a day, and that's the same in most parts of the healthcare sector, I would say. So there's a huge volume of data. A lot of the data is very sensitive, even when you think it might not be. So sometimes, to the layperson, it might seem perfectly innocuous that someone's being treated for a bit of lower back pain, but that could be related to all sorts of other things going on in their life, and throughout the course of an assessment, a person might divulge quite sensitive information about their medical background, their personal life, things that are going on at work or with their family, all of which could be relevant clinically. So you end up recording all of this information, and if that confidentiality were to be breached, then that would be extremely serious. So it's not really up to me as the physio to determine what or what isn't sort of serious information in a way. It's you have to treat all of it as confidential information. And that's something that all clinicians really across all healthcare areas are sort of bound by in terms of their professional regulations as well.
Absolutely. And how have you found that ISO 27001 has helped you with GDPR compliance, the General Data Protection Regulations?
Well, I mean, most of the things in GDPR were kind of already there in the last Data Protection Act, and just sort of tidies things up and improves data subjects' rights a little bit, and obviously increases the fines for breaches. So having 27001, made sure that we were already sort of prepared and making it much less likely that there would be a breach, and that we have good sort of incident reporting systems in place for dealing with any breaches or sort of near misses as well, that kind of thing, really.
Okay, great. So what would you say has been the main benefit from the implementation of an information security system? And what would you say that you've learned from that experience?
I think it gets you to take a complete look at your whole business and follow sort of the flows of data and look for things that you might have just taken for granted. For example, lots of businesses will record all of their telephone calls just for sort of quality purposes, maybe through 9001 even. And then they might not be thinking where those calls are stored. Are they being stored on an unsecure sort of hard drive somewhere that's not encrypted? What could be in that data? You might have patients calling up to pay over the phone and leaving sort of credit card details in recordings and things like that. So that's just kind of one example of where you might look and realize, oh, I'm sitting on a huge pile of data here that's not being looked after properly. So yeah, it gets you to kind of realize where your weaknesses are and then put a plan in place to deal with them. 27001 is, what we've learned is that it's not about having everything perfect. It's about making sure that you know what your risks are, you're doing your best to mitigate them, and you've got a plan in place to improve. There's always continual improvement.
Great, yes, which is obviously what the ISO standards are based on continual improvement. So that's really helpful. Thank you. So if you were to advise a company that was about to embark on implementing an information security system, what kind of top tips would you give them on how to go about it?
I would say definitely get some help in. If you're not sure, if you're not already very familiar with 27.
And we're not paying for you for this podcast, are we, David?
No.
Just want to make that clear.
No, it's yeah, absolutely not. But Blackmores have been invaluable, really, in guiding us through that process. And having had 9001, that was certainly helpful before, but we had a lot of help from your colleague Steve Mason, who really just sort of took us through the whole process. And then during the actual visits from the assessors, we went with BSI for that. Steve was there on the day, making sure he would sort of challenge anything that he thought was unfair or explain. Sometimes in the course of an assessment, the assessor might ask you, where's your such and such policy? And Steve would say, oh, well, actually, that's not relevant in this case because of X, Y, Z, or it's actually included within something else. So, he knows the standards inside out. So, yeah, having someone like that, even just to call on from time to time to check things, is really very useful.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, your information security management system doesn't necessarily need to be ISO 27001 verbatim, does it? It has to be interpreted to suit your organisation, your risks, your culture. So if you feel that there is a need for a policy on controlling a certain aspect of risk, then you should have that. It's really important that information security management system is tailored to suit your needs. So yeah, I think that's a good point that you've raised. Excellent.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, otherwise, I think, based on my experience, then it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, especially if there's terminology from the standard that isn't necessarily familiar to the company and it's not necessarily directly relevant. It's important that it's interpreted in the right way, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say it's not really. It shouldn't be a straight jacket. It's more like a well-fitted suit, I would say. So there are bits that aren't relevant at all.
Yes, yeah. I might use that in the future.
Yeah, there are bits
I like that one.
Go for it. Yeah, that's fine.
Lovely.
So yeah, we've adapted it to suit us, really. Yeah.
So thanks very much for sharing that information on your experience with 27001. I'd just like to end by asking you a couple of other questions, not related to the standards, but if you could gift a book to somebody, what would it be and why?
Well, I'm going to stay somewhat on theme, and I would say a book I have gifted a couple of times is called Ghost in the Wires by a guy called Kevin Mitnick. Yeah, and yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the subtitle is My Adventures as the World's Most Wanted Hacker. It's fantastic, sort of almost like an autobiography, really, of a guy who started out in the 70s and 80s hacking phone systems in America and then going on to hack software companies and all sorts of things. A lot of the time through using social engineering techniques, calling up people and sort of duping them over the phone. And it's a really good reminder of the value of things like penetration testing, which a lot of businesses don't do. It's a very gripping read as well, quite entertaining.
Ah, interesting. But for those listeners that don't know what penetration testing is, could you just expand on that, please?
Sure. I mean, that's the process of sort of testing the security of your business, and that could be done digitally. So it could be about paying an outside company to test that your firewall is sufficient, or any
Like
other
an
kind of
ethical
parts
hack.
of your but that kind of thing. Or it could be testing what if somebody calls up your office to try and sort of extract some data that they shouldn't be doing by using sort of social engineering tricks. So someone could call up and say, "Oh, my father or my brother is a patient there. Can you give me a copy of their medical records?" And some companies, maybe they would just hand that over without question. So yeah, it's that kind of testing as well, making sure that the people in your company are aware of the policies, because you can have the fanciest encryption systems and the best passwords, but if the people answering the phones or actually using those systems aren't aware of how to do that, then then it's only as good as a weakest link.
Okay. And sorry, I missed the name of the author because I think I was just speaking over you and I got quite excited hearing about the book. Could you just repeat the name of the book and the author again, please, David?
Yeah, it's called Ghost in the Wires, and the author is Kevin Mitnick.
Excellent, thank you. So what is your favourite quote that you'd like to leave listeners with today?
I'm quite a big fan of the Stoic philosophy, which has become a bit trendy, I suppose, lately in the business world as well. And there's a quote by Marcus Aurelius, who was one of the last good Roman emperors, as he's often described. It's quite a long-winded quote, but I'll try and summarize it when he talks about our sort of inner willpower being like a bonfire. And sometimes it might seem like they get swamped by all the sort of circumstances around us. But he says it can become like a bonfire mastering a heap of rubbish, which would have quenched a feeble glow, but its fiery blaze quickly assimilates the load, consumes it, and flames the higher for it. And I would say that can stay on theme as well, in that, with 27001, it's about looking for your weaknesses and then turning them into strengths, and not being swamped by the circumstances of information security.
Very apt. Excellent. Thank you very much for leaving on that quote. That gives everybody food for thought. So how can listeners find out about Optimum then, David?
Sure. Well, we've got a website, which is www.optimum-hcs.com. That's our main website, and you can find out all of our clinics on there. And there are links on there as well to our social media pages, which are mainly sort of consumer facing, but we share tips and things on there about managing injuries and aches and pains and things like that. So, and there's all contact details as well on the website.
Oh, helpful. I'll be going on that after my next netball injury because I'm often getting injured during matches. So that's really helpful. Well, thank you very much for your time today, David. I've really enjoyed talking to you and finding out a bit more about what you do and your thoughts and opinions in relation to information security. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mel. It's been great. Thanks, Mel.
You're welcome. Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with David today. We've got many more to come, and I look forward to joining you on the next ISO show.